Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Let's Dev, where today we continue working on our dodgeball game with roguelike elements. Now last time we took a break from adding new content to fix, tweak, and balance existing content. Well, technically we also did add stats to determine class movement and throw charge speeds. Regardless, the end result was a somewhat more polished experience with far more variation when it came to the classes. Oh, and we also discovered GameMaker's physics system is very restrictive when it comes to certain elements. Anyway, it was a great and much needed break after so many new additions were made. However, we've still got more to add, which brings us to today's plan. We'll be adding a class select menu to our game so the player can, select a class. Speaking of classes, we're also going to attempt to fix one of the classes with an entirely new ability. And finally, we'll add the first pass at a gameplay loop / difficulty system to the game. Sounds like a plan, so let's get to the coding. First up was the class selection menu, which would require a new room, controller for the menu, and a ton of patience. Normally this would be done between videos because it's, well, a lot of this. Just a bunch of number tweaks and test runs to get even the most basic of displays to show up properly. Because, Game Maker things. Anyway, this menu is pretty simple. Each class would be listed to the left with a possible description for that class's ability displayed to the right. Then, using some math, the mouse's position would determine which of those classes the player is currently hovered over. And when the left click is pressed, that choice is saved to a global variable for the player's class. Thus, the player is loaded as said class once the game begins. And as simple as this all sounds, again, the main issue has to do with GameMaker's approach to drawing. Well, pretty much anything. Regardless of a ridiculous amount of time tweaking the numbers, the menu worked and everything was in a nice enough place that we could move on. So next up was the tweaking to the Astute class. And by tweaking, I mean a completely new ability. Basically, the Astute, now known as the Adorn's ability, is to pull all free balls towards the player. It's basically the inverse of the Angry's ability. And as one would expect, thanks to the physics system, the results were pretty successful. Though this new ability will definitely need their timers tweaked. Also, I should use this time to explain the new player image. Between videos, I started messing with some of GameMaker's graphical options. The player's new sprite is a test version using vectors, which should technically look like this preview image. However, due to the low resolution of the game itself, it seems GameMaker has trouble rendering the proper shapes. It's a bit difficult to explain, but if I had to guess at what's happening, it's a mixture of the low resolution and GameMaker trying to math out the scale / positioning relative to the vector data provided. It's kind of funny and was definitely unexpected, but I kind of like the end result. It's weird and blocky and I'm all for it. Plus, the only alternative is a whole new art style or upscaling all the data to a higher resolution. Both of which are far less attractive alternatives to simply embracing the weird and blocky. Anyway, with the new class added and that long-winded explanation out of the way, let's move on. Result variables were added to the HUD controller. Then, if the end result is set to win or lose, a timer would count down to restart the level. Then a check for a single remaining player was made. If that player was not a CPU player, the end result was then set to win. And if the player is hit by a ball, the end result would be set to lose. That result was then drawn to the screen. And for the sake of uniform, these results were set via function, which we'll come back to in a second. First, tests were successful with the player being able to win by eliminating all opponents, or losing by getting hit by a ball thrown by said opponents. So with that working, a difficulty variable was added to the HUD controller. This difficulty variable would then increase or reset based on the results of the match. It would grow on a win and reset to 0 on a loss. And eventually, after wasting a ton of time eliminating CPU opponents, I realized that the difficulty variable had to be a global variable. Otherwise, it would just constantly reset to 0 no matter what. Anyway, with that working, it was time for our difficulty to actually do something. The difficulty would be capped to 6 and would basically be used to determine how many classes the enemy could choose from. For now, I simply use the current list of classes, as they are listed, as a quote-unquote difficulty tier. So basically at level 1, the worst that could be spawned would be the Splitter, and at level 6, every class was available. The results were successful, however, it's really hard to consider this a step up in difficulty, which is to be expected. In the future, difficulty will be raised at a much slower pace, along with just what it means for an increase in an opponent's difficulty. But for the time being, the main focus was to simply get something working in these areas, which was achieved to a great degree in my opinion. Not only have we added two very important aspects of the game, but also changed one of our classes for what I think is the better. And this is honestly a good place to stop and reflect so that we can come back and review things with a fresh pair of eyes. For the most part, I believe that we've got a good handful of features that can make up our main gameplay loop, and the happy accident in regards to the visual test was a nice cherry on top. So we'll have to wait and see where this project takes us next. There's still tweaks to be made and no doubt more to come, but that's for another time. For now, this brings us to the end of today's episode of Let's Dev. So remember to leave a like if you enjoyed the episode, subscribe and turn on notifications if you haven't already, and leave your thoughts on our progress in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.